Hey everybody, welcome back. This week it's time to beat the Kobayashi Maru by throwing all of our toys out of the pram and finally get that degree in Klingon as we hit Warp 5 and plot a course for the Star Trek universe. So with the first episode of Season 3 of Star Trek Discovery dropping on Netflix, I thought it'd be a perfect time to take a look at all things Star Trek, and specifically take a look at what my favourite parts are of sort of Star Trek media in general. In this video, I'll be discussing film and television, so any games, podcasts and any other media won't feature here. However, I do have an idea to sort of address a few of these and some others from other big franchises, a lot of the sort of peripheral entertainment that goes along with those things, maybe in another video at some point coming soon. So sort of stay tuned for that. So with all that being said, let's punch it. First off is the inspiration for this video itself, and that's Star Trek Discovery. Now I'm going to drop a quick warning here, there may be spoilers ahead for Season 1 and Season 2 if you haven't seen them already. However, I'll try not to reveal anything that happened in the first episode of the new season. Now Discovery is a bit of a Marmite series for a few fans. A lot of people say that it's sort of not faithful enough to the series that preceded it, while others say that the sort of change in style is quite a refreshing change. However, no matter how your opinions fall on this, what you can't deny is it is a very beautiful piece of sci-fi for the small screen. Now personally, I think this series is great. I think it adds a lot more great characters and a lot of good lore to the already existing canon. However, I do understand why a lot of people don't necessarily like it. It doesn't really fit in the same sort of vibe as the other series that came before it really do. And because of that, it's a bit more actiony and it's a bit more dramatic and there's a bit more danger going on. But I think that's fine. I think the thing is, it needs to engage new audiences as well as retain the original Star Trek audience. And at the end of the day, I think that really, when you're watching this show, you don't necessarily need to thoroughly love it if you're not into that kind of thing. If you're a big enough Trekkie, I think you could probably stand it enough to get through it to just get all the information. However, I think it's really good that there's a series like this. It just engages another kind of fan. If you're someone who's into a bit more action, then this is a Star Trek for you. If you like a few more of the sort of light-hearted stories and that kind of stuff, then you probably want something like Next Generation or maybe the original series. It's good that there's a different media there for each of you. On that note, speaking in terms of canon, a lot of people criticise the show for its sort of unwelcome additions to the lore. Stuff like new technology that doesn't appear in the original series, storylines that aren't even alluded to by the characters in the future and that kind of stuff. And I kind of do understand that a little bit. However, I do think Discovery does a very good job of covering its own tracks. There's no spore drives in the original series. Well, there's only one ship that can do it, and that's just jumped into the future. None of these characters appear in the original series or in Enterprise or anything like that. Once again, time travel's a thing. Did you not just hear me say that? One of the biggest criticisms though is a sort of how connected the show has become to Spock and why he doesn't mention any of these events in the future. That is something that I think is hard to pass by, and maybe they'll answer that in the upcoming series, we don't know. Maybe somehow his memory gets erased or something like that. We don't know at the minute, but I'm sure we will find out. On top of that though, I think Discovery does a really fantastic job of just balancing this and sort of alluding to the events of the main series and doing just enough to stay relevant without sort of getting in the way. A lot of the big things that this crew does, and they are big things, they basically save the universe at the end of Series 2, but what they've done is that these things are so big and they're so out there, they've become kind of myths and legends. They're almost too out there to be real, and so maybe people are aware of them in the main timeline, however, maybe they don't necessarily believe that this actually happened. After all, most of what the Discovery crew does is quite covert. Next up, I'm going to be talking about my favourite of the main series. Now, this is a really difficult one for me because I love all of them, to be honest with you, and I probably at this point could have just said all of them and be done with it. And in particular, The Next Generation and Voyager are two of my absolute favourites. I do like the original series and Enterprise as well, but they're just not as rewatchable for me. However, the main one, my absolute favourite, is Deep Space Nine. Now, if you've seen my Who's the Best Character video, you'll probably already know that my favourite character from the entirety of the canon is Captain Benjamin Sisko. Now, if you haven't seen that video already, there'll be a link up in the cards, but basically, I just think the fantastic thing about this character is sort of how much groundedness they give him, and at the same time, otherworldly significance by making him sort of a prophet, effectively. And not only that, this, to a smaller extent, does spread to some of the other main characters. Your Bashir, your Kira, your O'Brien, Dax, everyone that sort of makes up this show are really fantastic characters. And not only that as well, the villains are really well crafted. All of the founders and Gul Dukat are really great, and they add so much depth and conflict into this show that I really think makes it engaging. I also love this series because the Dominion War is a really engaging overarching story. It adds a lot more depth and stuff to all of the characters and all the events that's going on. There's sort of a real purpose behind everything. But not only that, there's some really good standalone episodes and some just smaller little subplots with some of the other characters. I think the show does this really fantastically, and although they don't visit as many planets as some of the other series, I don't think that that's missed because of all of the great character work they do and a lot of the main plots that they sort of discover as well. Not only that, but their sort of over-reliance a little bit on the holosuite is a really good aspect as well. I know that some people say that they use it a bit too much, but I think it adds a lot more story options for them, in a similar way to the way that Voyager explored this as well. Next up is one of my first forays into the Star Trek canon as a whole, and that is the film Star Trek First Contact. Now, I really enjoyed watching this film, and I've enjoyed watching it every other time that I've watched it since. But the main reason why I love it is because it's probably one of my first memories of watching any sort of Star Trek media at all. Now, a lot of sci-fi really dominated our household, including Star Trek and Star Wars and many others. In fact, so much so that we even had the Next Generation's chess set. I mean, we had so much of this kind of stuff. I'm pretty sure I had a pair of Star Trek pajamas. But this in particular was definitely my favourite, and I think the reason why it resonated with me so much is probably because of the Borg. Now, the Borg scare me. They still scare me. They're a really terrifying part of the whole canon of Star Trek. And it says a lot about my love about Deep Space Nine that it's my favourite series set in this kind of time period, even though it's basically the only one that hardly even mentions the Borg. However, I just think the Borg just add this horror dimension, this sort of real fear, I think, to it. The whole idea of indoctrination was used so much throughout the series, and it really adds a lot. Sometimes it's a bit of a MacGuffin when they can't think of another plot. It's just going to be, oh, the Borg are involved. The Borg indoctrinated this whole family. Oh, isn't it tragic that the daughter of this family got indoctrinated and their parents never get to see her again or whatever. And it may have been used a bit too much, but I think every time they did it, it was genuinely terrifying. In horror films in general, I've always had a fear of the monster that can make you one of them, and this is why the Borg resonated, I think, so much with me. Not only that, but sort of its inclusion not only in First Contact, but also in the episode Best of Both Worlds, where Picard becomes a Borg. Just so much of that just gives me chills even now talking about it right here to you. Now, what I'll be looking at next is actually a series that I'm not fully caught up on yet, and that is Star Trek Picard. Now, I know I'm laying it on a little bit thick with all of the sort of Sir Patrick Stewart stuff at the moment with these last two entries, but can you blame me? With such a raw talent that they've got here, why would I not talk about him a little bit more? The very fact that they had this sort of Shakespearean grade talking about phasers and all of that kind of stuff was so ridiculous at the time that it worked somehow. It was so peculiar and odd having him amongst all of this weirdness, and time again it paid off as he delivered fantastic performances throughout, and no more so than in the new Amazon TV series Picard. Now, Jean-Luc Picard is a really fantastic character. He's often rightly debated as being the most iconic captain alongside Kirk, and it's really well-earned praise. He's really fantastic in everything that he's in. all of Next Generation was really sort of made by his presence and his grandeur, and I think that something that Picard does really well is start to explore more about him as a person. Throughout his entire career with Starfleet, he was ruled by regulations and directives and all of this kind of stuff, but he always had a moral compass underlying all of this underneath. And now, because he's only got these sort of partial ties to Starfleet, where he's not properly an enlisted officer anymore, he can really follow his own prime directive. He can really go with what he thinks is right and fix things that he thinks needs to be fixed. And I think that this is a really intriguing aspect of this show. Now, shifting gears a little, I needed some kind of allusion to the original series where it all began. However, the thing for me is that a lot of the time I don't just sit here and think, I really fancy watching The Wrath of Khan. And that's not because it's not iconic, it's not because any of that series or any of those films are not iconic, because they are. And a lot of them are really good as well. However, having seen them once or twice, I just don't feel like I need to see them again. And again, that's nothing against them. They're not as rewatchable for me. However, something that I will be talking about is J.J. Abrams' Kelvin timeline, and more specifically, 2009's film just titled Star Trek. Now, I can already feel the hate for me choosing Chris Pine over William Shatner, but first of all, that's not what I'm doing. And secondly, these films don't need to exist instead of the originals. In fact, that's the whole point of them. The very nature and the premise of the very first film, the one I'm talking about, is the fact that this is a divergent timeline. And so much so that they even include the original Spock in this timeline. However, he is out of place as well. He's come through the wormhole and he's in the wrong timeline. Now, I know that the lens flares can be really annoying, and the over-reliance on destruction and the sort of over-the-top action can get a bit wearing as well. Not only that, but the sort of obvious rehashes and parallels to the original storylines can be a bit skin deep. Into Darkness was basically just Wrath of Khan, we all know that. But does all that really matter? They're still fun and engaging. I know that one of the biggest criticisms is that it feels like the relationship between Uhura and Spock just feels a little bit like they're spitting on the original, just for the sake of it. They just want to change things up and be different. However, can you imagine in a modern film where the only main character who's a woman, whose main job is to answer the communications, just ends up hooking up with the captain? It just feels a little bit out of place and a little bit out of time. And the relationship they build with Uhura and Spock is actually quite a nice touch. Also, all of this controversy just sort of serves to overlook the fantastic performances and real masterclass of sort of filmmaking that's on display throughout these films, and in particular, I think, the first one. Now, Karl Urban, for example, is a really fantastic Bones, and Simon Pegg's performance as Scotty is always funny, even if you're not a fan of his Scottish accent. But let's be honest, Hollywood doesn't want to cast Simon Pegg doing his own voice, so we've got to make do. Not only that, but the rest of the ensemble are really fantastic, and all of the sort of additions that come in the later films, like your Benedict Cumberbatches and your Idris Elbas, put in fantastic performances too. Overall, it's a really fantastic experience. I love this film so much that when it came out in cinemas, I watched it at least 3 times. And I've just never got sick of it. I never got sick of it when I watched it then, and I still don't to this day. It's a really great film, and it's always fun to watch. It's got a lot of action, it's got a lot of fan service as well out there. It's just really great, and what it does is it modernizes something that was a real big trendsetter, the first to set off this entire canon. But it doesn't erase it at the same time. It's a really loving nod, in fact, to a lot of that stuff, and I think it's such a good film, and all the controversies that surround it never sway my opinion of it. I always have a good time when I'm watching this film and the 2 that followed. Finally, I have a bit of an honourable mention, and I say that because, well, it's not actually Star Trek. Now, a lot of sci-fi fans out there watching this video might know what I'm alluding to already, and that's the series The Orville. Now, The Orville is the brainchild of Seth MacFarlane of Family Guy fame, And when it first came out, it was sort of created to sort of almost be a parody of Star Trek. It came out at the same time as Discovery. However, many fans thought that it was a sort of actually more faithful Star Trek series. Because of that, a lot of the episodes, as it continued its run, started to become a bit more serious, but the comedy's still there. And I think that this show does actually achieve this really well. When I watch The Orville, I get the same feeling I get when I'm watching Voyager, for example. The episodes have the same kind of feeling, the same kind of love put into them, and I think there's a very good reason for all of that. Now, if you're a fan of MacFarlane, or at least know of his work in general, you'll know that he is a huge fan of sci-fi. In fact, the Star Wars parodies on Family Guy, the sort of full feature-length episodes he did that was just making fun of them, are just testament to that. Not only that, but actually, he even appeared in The Next Generation as an engineer. See? As such, you can really tell that all the kind of jabs at Star Trek and sci-fi as a sort of genre as a whole come from a real place of true fandom and appreciation. It makes The Orville become a sort of loving homage to that thing that all of its creators really love so much. And that is so apparent throughout. This show has heart, it has drama, and it even manages to capture that sort of low-budget, sort of campy feeling that you get from some of the earlier Star Treks, even though the budget of the show isn't so shoestring. It does it really fantastically. It really sort of digs into what makes Star Trek great, and as such, I think it really does deserve a mention here in this video. So there we go. That's my thoughts on all of my favourite aspects of Star Trek and things slightly related to Star Trek. But what are your thoughts? What are your favourite entries into the canon, and what are your thoughts on Discovery? Do let me know in the comments down below, and don't forget to like, share and subscribe if you haven't already. And of course, until next time, one to beam up.